Good morning. Thank you for your patience. So to speed things along, I'm going to very quickly do an opening prayer, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Davidson. So if you all would just join me in a morning blessing. Heavenly Father, bless us today as we gather here together. Thank you, and keep your hand and guide us as we head into this fall season with the waning of daylight. And let your light shine within and inspire us and be a light for those who struggle with these shorter days and the waning of the daylight.
Yes.
We want to send up our blessings for that, but we also want to send up our petitions for our democracy, that it can rise above the fray in this election process. You've given us the vision and the gift of equality and freedom and liberty, and let us live into those ideals first and foremost, that this democracy can thrive. We ask for civility to rise. We ask for patience and for listening to occur in places where it might seem hopeless. But yet we know that with you, we can have hope. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay. Dr. Davidson, do you want to give a quick intro? For those that weren't able to join us last week, want to just do a very quick introduction of yourself and the courses that we're covering? We've got 4 more weeks ahead of us.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Steed Davidson.
Hello.
I teach at McCormick Theological Seminary, and I am in the field of Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, and I'm also the academic team. This month, we are looking at the book of Judges, women in the book of Judges. Last week, we looked at 3 or 4 different women in 2 stories. Today, we're looking at one woman, Jephthah's daughter, and we will look at some other women in the rest of the month. I do have the outline, and I sent that along to Michael yesterday. You may or may not have got that. So let's turn very quickly to today's thing on Jephthah's daughter, which, if you want to follow along, the story is in Judges chapter 11. Okay, let's see. You are sharing screen. Okay. I need stuff to get off. Are you seeing the screen, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
good.
we can see the screen. Thank you.
All right. Now let me see if you could respond. I have my own computer challenges. Oh, there we go. But you're not doing what I ask you to do when you need to.
I'm coming in by phone because I couldn't get through with the link.
That's fine. We're hearing you quite clearly. Are you hearing us?
Yeah.
Good.
Suzanne, I'll explain afterwards how to do it.
Oh, I just clicked on the link. I mean, what else? That's always been what works. With Zoom.
All right. Good.
We'll talk later.
Okay.
Right. So here's the story of Jephthah. And I mean, like other women's stories in the Bible, they are not standalone stories, but they're stories that are embedded within another man's story, either their father, husband, or something of the sort. So to get at the daughter, we need to come through the father, and understanding what happens we need to back up a little bit into chapter 10, chapter 11, and so on. So one of the sort of significant set of the backstory of Jephthah, he's one of several brothers. The father is sort of a fairly indiscriminate person and has children with multiple wives. I shouldn't say just indiscriminate, because sometimes that might hint at a particular kind of sexual practice, which is unusual for us today, but very normative in the ancient world. The thing that seems interesting in Jephthah's case, unlike his other brothers, where his father may have married or may have some more kind of a formal arrangements with the women, Jephthah's mother, at best we might want to call her a sex worker, but that again is always a difficult thing to ascertain within the ancient world as to whether a woman is a sex worker or not. because sometimes so independent women were derisively called certain names that might link them with that. But that is to say, as far as we can tell, Jephthah is not welcomed within the household of the brothers, of the father's children, and raised in some sense outside of that. And he was expelled in some ways by the brothers from that communal family gathering. But later on, when the community, they're facing problems with the Midianites, they call him in because he, in his youth and into adulthood, built up a good reputation as a sort of valiant and effective warrior. So here's this military strategy that strategists that they need to help save them. And we see the kinds of thinking that Jephthah brings to his work. Now, of course, he is motivated in this particular case to be a success. So he's going to try all the means available to him to ensure that he succeeds. So he first goes with the people he's supposed to be fighting against, negotiates with them, does a bunch of extortionary things, because essentially, and this is not unusual to Jephthah in the ancient world, people would do anything to avoid fighting a war because it's costly, not just only in lives but resources, and there is no limitless set of resources to just keep fighting a war, despite all of the representations that we tend to see of what life in the ancient world would have looked like. So he does all of that, to ensure that he doesn't have to fight a war, which sets us out with this guy who seems to be one that is capable of bargaining with God. And the bargaining with God is an important feature, because when the war comes and Jephthah is ready to fight the war, a critical thing occurs. And this is a critical event that happens in the book of Judges. What we are told is that the Spirit of the Lord falls on him. And that event of the Spirit of the Lord overtaking a person in the book of Judges is a sign of authentication. God has chosen this individual. God has endorsed this person for the task. And so we have this as in some ways like a seal and a guarantee of a good outcome. Up to, so in chapter 11, so all the maybe five times or so that has already occurred, or more times in the book, the person tends to have success at what they're achieving. Now we know this as readers. As readers, this is something we are aware of. We can't always see the characters are aware of it. But after that happens, what you have is Jephthah in some ways going to create this bargain with God to sort of seal his victory in the battle, basically promising to offer as a sacrifice whatever he sees once he returns home. And I'll get back to that in a while. The framing of Jephthah's sort of commitment or vow to God falls under what some people call the law of surprise. And the law of surprise is something that we've seen is a fairly old way of thinking about doing things, a sort of old kind of a bargain with God type of situation. And when I say bargain with God, I hope you understand this, because this is stuff that people will do. Those people who are sick could, today you'll have people saying, God, if you bring me out of this illness, then I would. And they make, elaborate promises. They'll give the church $10,000, or I will keep going to church every Sunday, or whatever it is, that type of a thing. So it's a very ancient way of looking at stuff, and we see it across several cultures. And the aim, of course, this sort of law of surprise tended to work either between individuals and deities, or across with two men. That is, you save my life, you give me the success I want, you deliver me out of this this problem, then what I will offer is something of great value. And the thing of great value is never named. It's hardly ever named because, of course, that's where the surprise part comes in. And in many instances, one of the things we will see is that it turns out to be the sacrifice of a child. Across several of the cultures where we see the law of surprise sort of being implemented, it works this way. Again, this is not to suggest that there is a sort of foreknowledge on the part of Jephthah that this is how it is going to work out. We don't know. We never know about biblical characters, and it's hard to say he knows unless the text tells us this. So Jephthah is in that position where he makes this commitment that if the outcome of the battle is favorable, then and this is where it gets puzzling in the Bible. You may see something depending upon which English translation you're reading, but in the Hebrew it's a little vague. That we're struggling with whether he says whoever is the first to greet him, or whatever is the first to greet him. So that part of our challenge for interpreting this biblical text is trying to come to terms with what is Jephthah saying? Is he willing to sacrifice anything, right? And by a thing, meaning animals, okay? Because he's saying what comes out. So it's something living that he's thinking about. He's not saying I am actually living and mobile. So it's not a grain offering that he's going to make, right? Because the wheat is not going to get up and go to greet him. So is he thinking in terms of animals, or is he thinking animals plus human beings, or just human beings? That's a big question for us. What did he intend? But for some people, the intent is not really what we need to get at. Is the impact that occurred. That is he's greeted by his only daughter, and it tells us about his relationship with this daughter, and therefore seeing her creates this strong, great emotional impact. He says, "You're brought me down because of this," and some people will read that to say, "Look, he's blaming the child or the young woman for doing something and getting in his way." So that's a big thing for us to come to terms with. Now, let's turn, and this is where the daughter comes into the story. Who is she, and what she looks like, again, comes up for conversation. Is she a little girl? Is she a pubescent girl, or is she a young woman? And those tend to be categories that make sense to us within our context, understanding that within this time, you didn't really have those three categories per se. You more or less had somebody who was pubescent, and then, of course, afterwards. So what we are told in the language of the Bible is that she did not know a man, which means several things. That she is unmarried, and more than likely that she is of marriageable age, which may suggest that she is sort of a post-pubescent girl in some ways. That's the important thing I want to focus on, that she is a marriageable age. And again, depending upon the English translation that you're reading, they would bring the language of virginity into it. And it's not that this is not the idea of her being a virgin is unimportant. I hesitate to use it because it tends to be clouded over by the way we understand notions of virginity in the context of a lot of the distortions of purity culture. So it's used, oh, she's pure and so on, therefore she's the best sacrifice. I think it's a question then in some ways about her age and where her sort of social category. Of course, after that emotional encounter between the two of them, and both of them are recognizing what's at stake, she gives in to the father, basically saying, look, you have to do what you said you're going to do. I will agree to this, but give me some time away. And what happens is she goes away for about 2 months on the mountains with her peers and engages in some form of ritual that then becomes a part of the practice of the community. Of course, we don't see it enacted any other time. What exactly it is, we don't know. We don't know. Some people suggest that it is some kind of fertility ritual that she engages in, because it's only women that's there. It's marked by the passage of the month, which could just simply be lunar cycles, because that's how the calendar goes, or it could also be menstrual cycles, something to do with fertility. But in many ways, it's as the sort of a rough translation from the Hebrew tells us, she goes and she is bewailing or mourning her maidenhead, that in some ways that she is not going to be a mother, and the sort of the social category of producing children that will in some ways be denied her. And so there's this interruption of what some people will call futurity. That is, there is no future for her. There is no lineage. She is not going to be a part of the reproduction of the community or her father or the family of any other man, right? Because she can't, as a girl, she cannot carry on her father's lineage. She would just participate in doing so for the sake of the man that she's married to. So that is something that will not happen for her. So some things come up when we look at this story, that no one is outraged over the idea that a human is going to be sacrificed. You read chapter 11, there's no discomfort. Jephthah isn't outraged. He's only outraged because it's his daughter. Perhaps was it in sort of question, if there was another person, would it be the case? This story is in many ways compared with the story in Genesis chapter 22 with the near sacrifice of Isaac, where again, Abraham is asked to sacrifice his son, and Abraham is not uncomforted by this notion. And he goes through nearly with it and until he is interrupted and stopped. And so there's no sacrifice of Isaac happening. But of course, in this case, there's no interruption. So many people are asking, is it because she's a girl why there is no rescue for her, whereas the boy was rescued and saved out of that problematic situation? And then we have a number of unanswered questions that come up for a number of people. And one of which is, why don't we hear from the mother of this child? Where is she? More than likely, she would not have gone along so easily with such an outrageous plan. So where is the mother? And then some people ask whether she was actually sacrificed or not, because we don't really see a reporting that it was affected, or some people think the report that we have at the end of the episode is vague and it leaves it open. So there's a suggestion that she wasn't really killed, but at best may have lived a life in seclusion, away from the community, in which case, or others would say, she was marked as not being marriageable. So she may have continued to live within the society, but living in a kind of social death. That is, if a woman's value was consisted in her ability to bear children, and she is marked as not marriageable nor bearing children, is she then, socially dead, even though living? There are a number of different questions that have come up as to her fate, whether it is physical death or social death, or of course the combination of the same. And I just raise a number of points for our consideration, but and we need not stick to these, but certainly to think about what is God doing here in this story. We know that up to the point where the Spirit of the Lord falls on Jephthah, that's as far as we see God. I tend to point out that even though Jephthah opens up his mouth and says stuff to God, you don't hear God. You don't see a scene where the two of them are shaking hands on it and say, that's the deal. This is an arrangement that Jephthah has made with himself, of course, presuming that God has authenticated it by the victory. And if so, there's a troubling silence and absence of God in the rest of the episode, where there is no Jephthah, this is not right. I won't accept a sacrifice like that. Right? Because the idea that he is making a sacrifice, the sacrifice of the child is to God. So there raises a number of troubling implications. Of course, the other thing is the patriarchal order, where a man now determines how to dispose of his daughter, whether to give her to another man to marry her, whether to offer her as a sacrifice, all of those things and the implications for women. Plus, of course, there is the expectation that women will always put their bodies on the line in service of men, and the projects that men are undertaking. Who are the, where do we see these sorts of issues coming up in our world today, and who are the ones who are bearing those burdens the heaviest? So those are some of the things. That's the story. So let's talk for a bit. We have 20-something minutes. If there are parts of the story that you're confused about, please, of course, feel free to raise those questions. And you could do so in the chat or else. All right, Leslie.
Sorry, I'm looking to see, there's nothing in the chat, but anyone that would like to ask any questions or get some clarification or just join the discussion, please unmute.
Hello.
And jump in. Good morning.
Hi, this is Suzanne.
Okay. Hi, Suzanne.
Yeah, this is the only story in the Old Testament where human sacrifice is allowed. I mean, with Abraham, God steps in. It says, oh, just testing you here. And every place else, the prophets and all, they rail against it. They say, this is a pagan custom. We don't do it. We're Jews. We don't go sacrificing humans. But of course, the Judges is very, very early and, rather primitive time. So that may explain it. But it's just very strange that this has been let to stand. And people, do question why this is the only time in the Bible that this happens. And it goes back to another really old book like Job, where this is like Jephthah is trusting in his own divination, which is like, okay, it'll be like a chance. It'll be like a bet with God. Whatever comes out, I kill. And so this seems very primitive, like God making a bet with the devil. Let's torture Job and see what happens. So here it's all about male honor, bets and games between male God and male person. And it's really one of the most shocking things in the Bible. And the only time human sacrifice is allowed in the Old Testament, of course, in the New Testament it's allowed, but here, it's a very strange book. I find this story.
Okay, we seem to have lost Suzanne, but some very interesting comments and observations that she raised. So let me start with what a comment, an observation that Suzanne put out of where there's a sort of a very vigorous condemnation of the idea of human sacrifice in prophetic books. The Book of Kings will identify those kings who permitted the sacrifice of children, and I think between Jeremiah and Ezekiel we will see some of those negative things as well. My sense is that we have to read those condemnations not as preventative measures. That is, here are people going along doing their own merry thing, and somebody had to come in to say, of all the things that you should not think about doing, this should be one of them. My way of reading is that they were actually performing them, and the outrage and condemnation was against the practice that was actually taking place rather than trying to prevent them. And so if we read it read the prophetic text in those ways, it helps us understand that an episode like this in Jephthah, where the sacrifice of a human seems and appears fairly normative. And I think we'll have to say the same thing about Genesis as well, that it feels fairly normative, because Abraham himself is not bothered. Abraham doesn't say to God, oh, wow, you asking me to do what? Right? Now remember, this is the same Abraham who is doing some other kinds of conversations with God in some other places. So my sense is that what we have to sort of think through, and I don't always like this, doing this, is this idea that the community changes and evolves, and there comes a point in time when it stops the practice, when it says, no, this is not us. And this may, what we're seeing in Judges may well represent that early phase in the life of the community where this would have been a thing. My sense, of course, is that there comes a point when ancient Israel tries to distinguish itself from the surrounding context. And this was one of those places where it did that distinction. But that it was not always exceptional, as we would like to think. It just did what everyone else did, offering human sacrifice.
Yeah, it also seems like, these were tales of warning, I forget the word, happens in the Mahabharata too. It's like, this must originally have been a warning, a story of a warning. Like, look what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think we could read it that way as well, because I really like that you are bothered by this. Not that I'm taking pleasure in the discomfort that you're talking about, but that you are naming it as a discomfort, because one of the things, the tendencies has been to talk about the book of Judges as getting worse and worse. And I tend to reorganize people's thinking by saying, no, it's terrible from the get-go. It doesn't get worse. I mean, because trying to relativize the horrors is not a useful practice, because it kind of says, well, we could live with this, but this one we can't live with. No, there's some things there's some things we should never make ourselves comfortable with. So you naming this right smack in the middle of the book is an important point to make, because we'll go on and we'll see some other things that I would not say is, wow, these are more horrific than the others. We have to in some sense name name things as being horrific because they're always horrific for the persons who are experiencing them.
Thank you. There's a good discussions going on in the chat. I'm not sure if you can read them, but the first one was, as humans, we are responsible for our own mistakes. In reading this, it matters to me that God does not ask or tell Jephthah to do this. Would you please react to my thinking?
Yeah, and I think that is quite important. I definitely agree, because part of the way the story has been read is to pay attention to what is apparently Jephthah's seemingly virtuous position. I have made a promise and I can't take back my word. And so many people look at it this way, in the sense that Jephthah now has lost responsibility because he's now bound by his word, bound by the relationship with God, bound by the demands of God. That God is the one now exacting this from him. But of course, as we read the story, we don't see anything of that sort. And as Susan pointed out, one of the things that we have to contend with in the story is the way in which male honor becomes the primary lens for looking at it. Because, you know, this is not me undermining people keeping their promises. That is a value. There's great value in that. But you all know that you promise things in one part of your life, which feels as if it makes sense, that you are capable of doing. And then there comes a point where you can no longer do it. You can no longer keep it. So it's, and many people contort themselves into trying to implement things that are now simply beyond their control, and of course go into all kinds of neuroses because they feel now like failures. And then the other part of it one has to question is, there are some promises that should never be made. So to bind yourself to a construct that says, I must keep my word, regardless of what that word is, regardless of the implications and the consequences of that word for others. Jephthah is eager to keep his word because he doesn't have to pay the price, ultimately. I mean, yes, there are things on his part that he's giving up. He's giving up his daughter. But the life and death, the ultimate consequences don't fall to him. So that when your word now, keeping your word, is about the life of someone else, right? Or taking away the life of someone else, you have to question, why did you make that promise in the very first place? So we have to look at the content of what he has given. And then, of course, to try to now sanctify that with the virtuous stuff by saying, I'm being obedient to God, becomes extremely problematic.
Yeah, the thread, thank you for that. The thread in the chat continues on the same thing. I'm not sure if you're reading that now, Dr. Davidson.
Some of it, let's see.
Yeah, I don't know if I should read it out loud, but
please do. Yeah,
okay. The difference is that Isaac did not know of the test set by God, but Jephthah's daughter did. Does that change the situation? Knowing the promise made to the Lord by her father, perhaps the lesson is more about knowing and honoring the oath made to God. Of course, a bit problematic because it's a woman who is enacting this vow, but Jephthah did not have any other children on record, at least. And then the follow-on conversation is, in the Isaac story, God initiates the sacrifice, while in this one, Jephthah initiates the human sacrifice. I think that may be the difference, and possibly the lesson is that.
Yeah. You know, the comparisons are important, and they're difficult, and then sometimes they're not. They may not be fair. Yeah. So I think it does make a difference that we have a self-aware child in this case, unlike in Isaac, where he is surprised because all along Abraham, and I mean, there are things that are just troubling about Genesis 22 if you slow down and read it, because here's the boy being curious and asking questions, and the father more or less refusing to answer the questions directly. We're going to do what? But where's it? Oh, don't worry, God is going to provide. But we're taking this. Don't worry. So it doesn't become clear until the father binds him and puts him on the slab to kill him, and plucks out a knife. Now, very early interpreters of this story understood that is a traumatic experience, and so you're seeing in rabbinic literature references to the trauma that a child would have experienced to do that, and references to the fact that Sarah stopped speaking to Isaac for the rest of her life, to Abraham for the rest of her life. So, but compare that, what we have is now a daughter that in some ways willingly goes, if you wish. I think the difference is important, though I don't think what it does is to make one more acceptable than the other. That she sort of does it, basically in some ways opens up the conversation about the way in which women are either expected or compelled, right? Compelled by the social conventions to go along. So that the consent here, her awareness, her knowledge, her sort of participation may very well be the kind of socialization and structuring of women, where women are expected to give themselves over to purposes that are bigger than them, things to service male honor, and the ways in which the males understand spiritual and religious relationships and that sort of a thing. So that's where I would see some differences coming in. And to the extent that we see, Jephthah initiating this by offering opening up the idea of offering a sacrifice that could possibly be a human. Yeah, it does make a huge difference, because it does let us question, what on earth is this man doing? Who is this man? So it puts him in a certainly different category.
And that's the next question was, why did he feel that he needed to make the bargain in the first place? Did he not have confidence in God's will?
Yeah, and so that's the point where I spent some time talking about the Spirit of the Lord piece with him, and this is where there is that conversation. Here is someone who got all the signs of God is with you, but then decides, let me strike this bargain as extra protection, just in case. And in many ways, Jephthah is a desperate person, desperate for the affection and approval of his brothers, desperate to kind of climb the social ladder, to get back in, or to get into the center. Because here is somebody who has been operating on the margins, like a soldier of fortune. He has never had respect. So he's desperate to do anything. And so even when given hints, this is going to be good, God is going to have your back, he still decides, let me add another layer, just in case this doesn't come true, because maybe I don't trust what God is saying. Maybe this spirit that just took over me isn't correct. But just to be sure. And of course, people do that sort of a thing. We tend to do that. Is the just to be sure, just in case. And you can push that to the place where you start doing things that become detrimental to other people. And so for me, I think there's one thing for us to get into those spaces where we are bargaining with God, and what we're doing is some form of self-harm. But then it becomes a very different thing when the harm starts to spill over into other people. And I think this is one of the important things, the tragedies that we're seeing, is that Jephthah's way of dealing is not simply about harming himself, but about others. But this is what happens with men. And when men control particular levels of power, that the kinds of decisions men will take that will be hurtful to them will spill over into a whole number of other people. That's undoubtedly so.
I am going to refrain from making an analogy to current
I know.
I said I'm refraining.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davidson. Any other questions? I don't see anything else in the chat. I do want to remind folks that Dr. Davidson has posted, or Michael has posted, what we'll be reading in the coming weeks. But we've still got a couple of minutes left, and I want to make sure that if there's other questions or conversation or comments folks want to share.
I have something. My name's Annette. This is problematic for me. I don't read the Bible literally. So to me, I can't believe that God would want me to sacrifice a child. And someone might say, well, he doesn't. He just wants to see if you'll follow his will. Well, that is just not okay with me. The child gets upset, blah, blah, blah. So I don't take it in literal terms. This is what I say to myself. So do you trust in God? And if so, how much? And which parts of this story have some meaning for me? And which parts don't? I don't even get into the political rap anymore about how men don't appreciate women in the Old Testament, blah, 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 blah. I just try to look at the metaphor and see what that means to me. Okay, I'll be quiet now.
Yes. Well, so Annette, one of the things I tend to press people on is to actually enter into much more non-literal readings of the biblical text, not so that you could say this actually took place, but so that you could start to feel the implications for it. Because I want people to see not figurative death, figurative pain, but that there are people who actually die from bad decisions. There are women whose bodies are actually harmed. So that in a book like Judges, it's important for me to help people get the point of that this isn't an abstraction. That the implications really are not abstractions. So we might read it as an abstraction. We might read it as literary portraits. We might read it without having to discern all of the big historical implications. But don't then just leave it at that, but rather now start to ask, even if not for me, then who? Whose bodies are threatened? Which women get to the point of dying, of actually dying as a result? So those will be the places I would push you to go, rather than this is a great tale, here is the moral that I would take away from it. Start to think of big implications, and what does it mean? Where are the places within the community I'm living in where not the same thing happens, but you start to see some of the same set of implications occurring, and to think both at the level of the women who are at risk and whose lives are at risk, and also of the women who may not have the resources to handle these types of challenges.
And I can do that. To me, it's like stories. Stories, in my opinion, are told so that we can share our experiences and learn from them. And so, I can see where women are at risk in my community, and I can see where human mistakes are made in bargaining with our kids and things like that. So for what it's worth, I do look beyond this.
Yep, good, thank you. Yep.
Thanks for sharing. Dr. Davidson, I missed one question in the chat box that I want to go back to. Susan asked, this reminds me of Herod and Herodias. Is this a parallel story?
So there are many ancient stories of men sacrificing their daughters, and yeah, we'll see that. We'll see it in a lot of the Greek literature.
Yep.
Where and it's always about when there is some crisis and somebody tells another person, it feels like a good idea, we need to offer up someone. So yeah, not unlike that. Okay, all right, so.
Sorry, I forgot I was on mute. Thank you so much. We're coming up right on 10:30. I know we got started a little late.
Right.
For those of you that are able to see the chat, we are posted at the top the next couple of chapters. For next week, October 25th, we're going to cover Samson's Women, chapters 13 through 16. The week of November 1st, the Levites.
Yeah, Pelagash. Yeah, I'm going to use, I'll explain what that term is.
Then please go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard term to translate into English. It has tended to be seen as concubine, or some would say secondary wife. So we'll get to that.
Interesting. And then November 8th, Trafficked Women, chapters 20 through 21. I think Michael will send an email out with these upcoming readings and chapters for the next 3 weeks. Thank you all for your patience. We appreciate it. We'll get through some of these technical glitches. It's 2020.
Yeah.
We'll hopefully be able to move on. Sorry.
And for next week, if I'm asking you to read chapters 13 to 16, starting at chapter 13 you might want to do that because you get to read the story of Samson's mother, which is not very well known. But if you don't get anything else, read chapter 16, which is the heart of the Samson and Delilah story. But there are other women in Samson's life besides Delilah, the mother and some other women that he kind of consorted with. So if you read all of those 4 chapters, you'll get that full treatment. But if you're running out of time, just do 16.
Okay. Suzanne, I'm going to write you an email. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you all. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful week. Stay safe. We'll see you next week.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.